Okay. When Murray comes back, I'll ask him. We're not providing feeds for anyone.
Oh no, some of that was an extreme one.
No, I know Sky and BBC have
Yeah,
live, but we don't know how much of
Since a rectangle is, by definition, a shape of four sides and four right angles, all squares are technically rectangles, just one from both sides. That's good news for the national flags of the United States, which is, turns out they're not so far from the rule. After all, the icon red plus used by the international committee of the Red Cross, not to be confused with the American Red Cross, which uses relative organization, wasn't superior to the Swiss version of the icon.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Northern Ireland edition of Tories Have Got Talent. We will meet the two contestants in just a moment. It's great to be back in Belfast. I haven't actually been here since 1992, believe it or not, when I was advising Belfast Harbour Commissioners on privatisation. Has that gone okay? Okay, all right, okay. Right, let me tell you how today is going to work. Each of the candidates will have 7 minutes to address you. Yes, all of 7 minutes. Then I'll be interviewing them for 10 minutes, and then it's over to you to ask questions. What I would suggest, and it's only a suggestion, if you think I haven't asked the right questions on particular issues, feel free to ask more. But it's always good in these things to try and test the candidates on a whole range of questions, not just Brexit, not just maybe the reformation of the Assembly and Executive. There are lots of other things to talk about as well. So let's try and have a wide variety of questions. The whole thing is being streamed live. It's also, I think Sky and the BBC are probably taking it as well. So do not take your cues from the Birmingham audience and boo the host. That would be appreciated. I may give you an opportunity to do so, but you needn't feel that you have to. So we'll also be playing a short video from each of the campaign teams as well before you meet the candidates. So without further ado, let's watch Jeremy Hunt's little video.
The most striking quality about Jeremy Hunt was his unwavering commitment to get results. I think perhaps part of that is to do with his background in business. No matter what the obstacles were, he was prepared to push through them. He wanted to get results.
I've seen him deliver on the things that matter most to the British people. He has credibility from all sides. I trust him on Brexit.
I've known Jeremy for 40 years, and about 25 of those years we worked together, setting up various businesses. Those early days were absolutely about his determination and grit. He would never give up.
When I first met Jeremy, I realised he was a man who actually was committed to making a difference.
In 2008, I lost my baby son Joshua as a consequence of serious failures in his care during my campaign to kind of uncover the truth about what happened. I was struggling to be heard. Jeremy really listened and treated me as a grieving dad rather than a troublemaker. I knew that this was somebody who was going to change things.
My mum died quite tragically in poor care in Mid-Staffs. Jeremy was incredibly kind. He saw the bereaved daughter behind the campaigner, and he saw the people that mattered.
I have known Jeremy Hunt since the early 2000s. He and his business partner started funding the education of children living with HIV in our community-based programme. Jeremy's generosity was sensed by us all.
That desire to make a difference really drives him. It's never been about him. It's always been about what he can do to help others.
The work he's done will save the lives of countless babies, and other families will not have to go through the kind of pain that we did.
People often underestimate Jeremy because he comes across as being such a polite and generous and nice person, and he is. But I remember hearing him warning the EU not to mistake British politeness for British weakness, and I thought that just about sums him up.
I was pessimistic about the London Olympics. I thought, we could mess this up. I remember talking to Jeremy in the build-up. He said, no, we're a great country. We can do this if we have the right mindset. The delivery was outstanding. It also had this element of fun. I know that Jeremy was very involved in getting that balance right.
He believes in Britain as a force for good in the world. He's shown strong values at the FCO and consistently good judgment.
Negotiating, toughing it out when things get really difficult, keeping going, having a vision. Those are the skills that we need in a Prime Minister.
He's a unifier. He's somebody who can reach out to different groups of people.
My dad always taught me that politics should be about making a difference in ordinary people's lives. And Jeremy made a huge difference to our lives. He gave us hope, and that for me was the main thing, that he gave us hope in some very, very dark days.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jeremy Hunt.
Thank you very much, Ian, who has been coming round the country with me and Boris and always looking very attentive at those videos, even though he's seen them 100 times. It's a huge pleasure to be, I'm going to stand in front actually, it's a huge pleasure to be here this morning. Last night, after a very busy day campaigning, I settled down to the penultimate episode of the last series of Game of Thrones. And this was, of course, nothing to do with wanting to relax. It was preparation for today, because, of course, you can be very proud of Game of Thrones being filmed here. And, in fact, I was Culture Secretary in 2012 when we negotiated that TV tax credit with the Chancellor, which bought the Game of Thrones series here, £150 million of investment. I'm slightly less proud of all the blood and gore and guts that you see in that programme, but I'm proud to be here for another reason, which is that as Foreign Secretary, I go all over the world, and whether it is Yemen or Burma or Israel-Palestine, people look at the peace process here as a shining inspiration of what is possible. And I know back home people worry about the fragility of it, but I want you to know how proud I am and how proud the world is as to what was achieved here, that very, very significant moment in our country's history. And I'm standing here because I want to change our country for the better. To govern is to choose, and I have 4 priorities that I want to change, and I'm going to tell you those 4 priorities, but we can't do any of them until we sort Brexit. And yesterday I met representatives from the Northern Ireland Farmers Union, the Food and Drink Federation, people from the border towns around Newry, and they talked to me about their concerns about a no-deal situation, not least the fact that 60% of the province's exports go through the Republic of Ireland. And that is one of the reasons why yesterday I announced a £6 billion support package for businesses, particularly farmers and the fishing community, to help us weather no deal if that is what we end up with. But I want to tell you that that would not be my first choice. And indeed, it's not the real choice in this election, because both candidates have said that we have to leave the European Union. That was the democratic decision. And both candidates have said that we have to leave without a deal if that's the only way to do it. The choice we have is who is the Prime Minister we send to Brussels who has the best chance of negotiating a deal, of avoiding those difficult choices that we would face in a no-deal situation. And if you choose me, I'll be the first Prime Minister who's ever had a background as an entrepreneur. I'm sure there are lots of people here who started their own businesses. What do we do when you start a business? You negotiate. And negotiation is what I want to do for our country to get the best possible Brexit outcome. And then the excitement starts. So I'm just looking at the clock here because Mr. Dale here will give me a big ticking off if we go over. But my 4 priorities, the first is, as someone who set up their own business, I want to fire up our economy. I want to turn it into the most pro-growth, pro-enterprise, fastest, most green, most high-tech economy anywhere in the world. We have some of the best universities in Europe, some of the best in the world. We could be the world's next Silicon Valley. Here in Northern Ireland, you know that because you have 40,000 people employed in the creative industries. A huge achievement and a huge opportunity. So that's number 1. Number 2, I am the Foreign Secretary who wants our country to walk tall in the world. My dad was in the Navy. We followed him all over the country. And I passionately believe that Britain is one of the few countries that stands up for democratic values and the security needed to underpin them. So I've said I will increase our defence spending to beyond 2% of GDP to send that signal to the world that at the point of Brexit, Britain is here, Britain is back, and our voice is going to be strong in the world. My 3rd priority is one that is actually a devolved matter, but I want to tell it to you because it says something about our values as a party which will be important here in Northern Ireland. I was Health Secretary responsible for the NHS in England for nearly 6 years. And we, as a Conservative Party, have to have a social mission as well as an economic mission. And I find it deeply troubling that nearly a quarter of our primary school leavers leave unable to read or write properly. And I want us to be the Conservative government that abolishes illiteracy and makes a promise that every single young person will leave the education system with the rigorous qualifications necessary to get a decently paid job. And the fourth of my 4 priorities is actually one for the Conservative Party itself. We have got to get more young people supporting us. We can't be the party of aspiration if the most aspirational people in our country don't vote for us. So I make a promise that we will go for young people with a whole series of policies. And of course, why did Corbyn do so well at the last election? Because he got young people to support him. We need them supporting us. And I will never, ever ignore the biggest threat facing British politics, which is a Labour Party led by the most dangerous, ruthless, anti-Western, anti-British, hard-left cabal that we have ever seen in British politics. Get this wrong, and there will be no Conservative government, no Brexit, maybe even no Conservative Party. Get this right, and we will deliver Brexit, unite our party, unleash the potential of our great country, and send Corbyn packing. And that's what I'm going to do. Thank you very much indeed.
On my way here from the airport, I asked my taxi driver what would he ask the both of you if he had the chance. And he said, how is it justified for politicians in Stormont to be paid a salary when they're not actually doing anything? How are you better placed than your opponent to get the Assembly and Executive up and running again?
Well, you're about to hear from Boris, so you can ask him that question. But how would I do it? First of all, it is totally unacceptable that politicians who are paid to run the NHS, to run the schools, to promote inward investment, are not turning up to work and doing their job. And we have to be absolutely clear. This is a big abdication of responsibility, and they need to get back to delivering what was a fundamental tenet of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, which is that devolved assembly. What would I do as Prime Minister? Well, I think the lesson of that historic achievement back in 1998 is that the only way to do this is with the personal involvement of the Prime Minister. And I think we need to have a Prime Minister who is prepared to put in the time to really make this happen. And I think Theresa May has been very committed to Northern Ireland and to the Union, but I give you this commitment that I too, as Prime Minister, will put in the time personally to get that Assembly back up and running. I think both sides need to understand that personal commitment from number 10.
Why do you think it hasn't happened so far? I mean, in terms of getting it back up and running, the talks now, I think I'm right in saying that these latest talks have been going on for 10 weeks. Not sure there's a huge sign of any progress.
Well, I think the fact that the talks are happening after the tragic murder of Lyra McKee is a step forward from where we were. There are, of course, the things that trigger these walkouts, but in the end, it's about building up trust between the sides. Now, we have an opportunity. We have two sides that are talking, and I would do everything in my power to get those talks to come to fruition.
Backstop.
Thank you. What a delight.
Do you recognise that the backstop in its current form doesn't have the support or consent of most unions and therefore breaches one of the fundamental tenets of the Good Friday Agreement? What would you do about that?
Well, I do recognise that we are never going to have a deal to leave the EU with the backstop. And so it has to change or it has to go. And the fundamental issue with the backstop is not the principle that we shouldn't have border infrastructure on the island of Ireland. I think that's accepted by all sides in the Conservative Party, by the DUP, by everyone who's been involved in this debate. The principle is the backstop which traps us into following EU customs tariffs until the EU give us permission to leave the customs union. And you know, for a Brexit vote that was about bringing back sovereignty to Parliament, that is not acceptable. I was one of the people who argued against accepting that backstop in Cabinet, but I think it's important that a Prime Minister has a loyal Foreign Secretary, so I kept those discussions private. But that has to change, and we have to find a different solution. And I think it will be a technology-led solution, what the Germans call an invisible border. We are rapidly understanding the potential of technology now, and I think the work done by Greg Hans and Nicky Morgan in the Alternative Arrangements Commission is the basis of the solution.
But the EU keep telling us that the technology isn't there.
They do, and I think one of the reasons they tell us that is because, frankly, it would be easier for them and better for them if we stayed inside the customs union. So we have to negotiate a way to resolve any difference of opinion, some arbitration mechanism that would resolve how you solve a situation where there's a disagreement about what technology can do. But both sides agree that if technology can do this, it's the way forward. I believe it is, and I don't actually think it needs new technology. I think we can do it with the technology we have.
There used to be a phrase that many Conservatives uttered some years ago, saying the Conservative Party should not out-Farage Farage. Now, yesterday you made a speech where you've been accused of trying to out-Boris Boris. You've become very, very Brexity all of a sudden. Some people are saying that's another flip-flop.
Not at all. And the position that I outlined yesterday is the position that I've been arguing for in the Cabinet as Foreign Secretary for the last year. I've always thought we need to go further and faster on no-deal preparations. And that there is a difference between Boris and my position. I don't think it's as big as people maintain, but basically I've said if we get a deal and it needs a few more days to get through Parliament at the end of October, I wouldn't rip that up, because I think it would be much better for everyone, but particularly in Northern Ireland, to have a deal. And he has taken an absolutist position on that date. But both of us have said that if there is no prospect of a deal, then we will leave without a deal. And I would do that because, you know, when I go around the world and people tell me what it is they like about Britain, it is that we are one of the oldest, most robust, most established democracies in the world. And what does that mean? We're a country where people like me do what people like you tell us to do. And that's why we're not just going to do Brexit, but we're going to make it a terrific success.
But you've accused Boris Johnson of imposing a fake date of October the 31st. But yesterday you imposed one of your own, the 30th of September, saying if there was no prospect of a deal by then we would leave under no deal. What's the difference between imposing these two deadlines?
Well, the reason I say it's a fake debate about the 31st of October is because both of us have got the challenge that Parliament is trying to take no deal off the table. And it doesn't matter who's Prime Minister, if Parliament takes that option off the table, then it's off the table. But why did I talk about the end of September? Because I want to give the EU a reasonable amount of time to consider new proposals made by the new British Prime Minister. When they have done that, the Prime Minister needs to make a judgment as to whether there's a deal there that can get through Parliament. I don't think it'll be just the Prime Minister making that judgment. I think we'll all know. I mean, the EU seem to come back pretty quickly if they're not prepared to countenance a negotiation. I believe they will, but if they don't, then there's got to be a moment when we say, okay, the talking's over, heads down, we're going to prepare for no deal. And that's why the package I announced yesterday included, I think, the biggest package of business tax cuts that we've ever had in our country's history, designed to help businesses like the small business that I set up weather the storms that you would get with no deal, so that we can get through to the other side.
Do you think abortion and same-sex marriage should be legalised in Northern Ireland? And if the Assembly didn't vote it through, should the UK Parliament do it on equality and human rights grounds?
Well, these are deeply personal issues. If I was Northern Irish, I would want the law changed in both those areas. This is a devolved matter, and I think the best way to resolve this is to get the Assembly back up and running and to establish a consensus in the province so that we can go forward on these very difficult issues.
Sarah Canning, Lyra McKee's partner, has said that the biggest tribute that could be paid to her is for the UK Parliament to intervene and introduce same-sex marriage in Northern Ireland. What's your response to that?
Well, I sincerely hope the law does change, but when you change the law on an issue like this, you do need an element of social consent, and I would like to see the Assembly have a look at that issue in detail first before any decision was taken along those lines. All I will say is that opinions change, and we see opinions change very dramatically in England since that law changed to widespread acceptance of this as being the right way to go. So I hope it happens, but I think it's something where we need to take the population with us.
Do you think it's about time the Conservative Party organised properly in Northern Ireland?
Well, I want Conservatives to be standing up for our values everywhere. And I want to salute the people in this room because it is tough for all of you. And to be a Conservative in a part of the country where we don't have any MPs at all shows particular commitment to our cause. So I will back you as Prime Minister. It's a long journey, but I would love to see Conservative MPs, Conservative Assembly representatives in Northern Ireland because we are a united kingdom, and I would like the party of the Union to be represented in every part of our united kingdom.
Here's the final lighter question from me, which I know you always look forward to. You mentioned Game of Thrones a minute ago. Which Game of Thrones character do you most identify with?
Well, God, I'm not going to say something cliche like Jon Snow, but what I'm going to just tell you is that the best story I heard about Jon Snow was that about Kit Harington, who's the character who plays, for those who don't watch Game of Thrones, the hero, is that he was apparently stopped for speeding in the province. And the police officer said to him, now there's two things that I can do. Either I can give you a speeding ticket, or you can tell me if you come back to life in the next episode of Game of Thrones. I thought it was a great story.
So you're getting out of actually giving an answer by that anecdote.
Oh, go on then. Jon Snow.
Right, time for questions from the audience. Who would like to ask the first one? First one here, second one there. Just wait for the microphone.
Jeremy, you concluded your speech there by stressing your commitment to the Northern Ireland Conservatives, but yesterday you did mention in a speech that, I'll quote here, a new political negotiating team will be convened with members of the ERG, the DUP, members of the One Nation group, Welsh and Scottish Conservatives. Now I think it's quite noticeable that we are conspicuous by our absence, yet the DUP are not negotiating group. Perhaps you could elaborate on that.
Of course. There's a very simple reason for that. That negotiating team that I'm assembling is the negotiating team that we need to get a majority in the House of Commons in order to get a Brexit deal through. One of the reasons why, unfortunately, the negotiations stopped with Theresa May was because the EU stopped believing that the British government could deliver the British Parliament. And so they said, why should we make any concessions if it's not going to make any difference in Parliament? So we need to persuade the EU that we have a coalition that can get a majority through Parliament. And we do depend on that partnership with the DUP, but also with the Brexit purists in the Conservative Party, the ERG, and also I've included Scottish and Welsh Conservatives in that list because I want their concerns to be properly addressed. But it's simply about getting the parliamentary arithmetic.
Will you look at renewing the deal with the DUP?
we need to renew that deal with the DUP because we need a majority in Parliament. I would infinitely prefer us to have Conservative MPs in Northern Ireland so that we didn't need to depend on another political party for that majority. But you know, to govern is to accept the world as it is and then to campaign to make it better, and that's what I hope we can do.
It cost the taxpayer £1 billion last time. There's still 3 years to go in this Parliament. Are we going to see a similar sum?
We have that agreement with the DUP. We paid the money, and I would like them to do their bit and help us get a Brexit deal through. Let me leave it at that.
Right, gentleman there.
Paul McGarity, member.
Followed by
Paul McGarity,
Paul,
a member of the North Down Conservative Association. Oh, sorry. Will you be able to pledge, Mr. Hunt, that there will never be a separate Northern Ireland only referendum on the issue of the backstop, and that in relation to Brexit, that Northern Ireland will be treated in exactly the same way as all the other parts of the United Kingdom?
Yes, and you know, let me be clear. I think that is the heart of the difficulties that we've had with the current deal. Is a fear that the backstop, which the Northern Ireland business community on the whole welcomes, but unionists in Northern Ireland feel concerned by because they worry that it would either risk different regulatory environment for Northern Ireland to the rest of the UK, which would be a barrier for the union, or it could mean the whole of the UK had to follow EU regulations which could weaken the commitment to the union in the rest of the UK. So for that reason, we have to change the backstop. I think it's very important to remember that Northern Irish trade with GB is more than Northern Irish trade with the Republic of Ireland, the EU, and the rest of the world put together. So we can never have any barriers to trade between Northern Ireland and Great Britain.
Right, gentleman at the back, followed by lady in the middle there.
Hello, good morning. Can you tell us, Jeremy, you did say 100% commitment to Conservatives in Northern Ireland, and we have had consecutive PMs, party chairs and Secretary of States doing the same. Can you specify what support and how you would help Conservatives in Northern Ireland?
Well, I happen to believe that the union is something that we have taken for granted for too long. And when I think about the Scottish independence referendum in 2014, I believe we were complacent in the run-up to that referendum, and we had a nasty scare during that campaign when it looked like it was getting very close, but I think we've been complacent after it. And I think it's absolutely essential that the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom puts a lot of time and thought into nourishing the bonds of our union. And some of that is through symbolic things like coming here frequently and supporting the Northern Irish Conservative Party, which I'm absolutely committed to do. But some of it is also through the approach you take to policies. And I think that Brexit, if we get it right, can massively strengthen our union because it will allow our great country to plough its furrow in the world in a way that is distinctly, uniquely British and makes all the four parts of the UK proud to be British. But we've got to get there, and we've got to get there with a deal that makes that possible, and that is my commitment. That is the deal I'll negotiate.
Would you ask your party chairman, though, to actually create a better infrastructure for the Conservative Party here? I suspect that was more what the gentleman was really implying, in that I think certainly friends of mine in Northern Ireland say that the Northern Ireland Conservative Party feels completely cut off from the main Conservative Party and doesn't get that level of support.
Well, I'll be very open to doing that. If you tell me what you think needs to happen, that's something I would certainly happily consider.
Right, lady in the middle there, followed by the gentleman over here.
Northern Ireland benefits greatly from EU funding, especially the voluntary sector. Yet there's still been no public consultation on the Shared Prosperity Fund or Treasury guarantees for Peace Plus. I'm just wondering what you intend to do if you do become party leader.
Well, I think we absolutely have to maintain our commitment to all four parts of the UK. Obviously, when we're not making contributions to the EU, we will be saving around £9 billion a year, and we will be able to make up for some of the shortfalls from parts of the UK that have received funding, and I'd want to do that in a way that was fair. But the more important point that I want to make to you as a fellow Conservative is that we need to demonstrate to the whole country that we are not just the party of London and the South East, which are our heartlands, because we can never win a general election unless people see a real commitment to the whole of the UK. Of course, that includes Northern Ireland. The package that I announced yesterday of no deal support would have a particular focus on Northern Ireland, because this is one of the parts of the country that we're most affected by no deal. But that approach has to follow all our infrastructure investments, all our support for university research, and it has to be part of everything we do.
Okay. Gentleman over there, lady here.
Hi, Mr. Hunt. I very much like what you said about getting young people more involved with our party, because I think we should be the party of the young. As a student from Northern Ireland who studies in Hull, there's this particular issue I'd like to ask you about, and as Health Secretary, for previous Health Secretary, I think you might have an interesting insight to it. What do you think about the possibility of being able to allow students to register at more than one GP? So as someone like me who is now home for 3 months could go to a GP if I need to while I'm at home?
Well, that is a impressively detailed and specific question, and I've got the answer to it, but I'm not sure it's going to be quite enough to get all young people to vote Conservative. But the answer to that question is, of course, we need people to be able to use GPs anywhere they go in the country, and that includes to different parts of the UK. And the way to solve that is something that I championed as Health Secretary, which is to have an electronic health record, which means that it's just incredibly easy for a GP anywhere you go to log into your details, and with your permission, of course, and then you can get the treatment you need wherever you go. And so that's how I would do that. But in terms of how I attract young people more generally, if I could just mention, I think there are some specific things in an English context that really bother young people, like the interest rate on tuition fees, the difficulty of getting onto the housing ladder, which I'm sure is an issue here, but it's a devolved matter. But I think there are also what you might call values issues, things where young people just need to know that we're on the same side and we get where they're coming from. And probably the biggest of those is climate change. We have done an enormous amount over the last 9 years. In fact, we've done more than any other major economy. If you look at our growth since 1990, our GDP is 70% higher and our carbon emissions 40% lower. And there's nowhere else that comes near that in terms of big economies. But the truth is, it's not enough. And we need to be able to answer the enough question for young people, because they look at people like me and they say, you know, we're going to be around in 50 years' time, and even with the aging population, you may not be. And so we want to know the planet's going to be safe.
No helicopter landed after a climate change answer, which is unusual. In Carlisle, when Boris was answering a climate change emergency question, a helicopter landed, and it turned out to be Jeremy's. Right, lady there, and then the gentleman there.
Felicity Houston, East Belfast. Jeremy, you were talking quite a lot about, particularly with your experience as Foreign Secretary, of getting Britain back on the world map in the position we should be in, and using our soft and hard power. But I'm particularly wondering how you see we would work with our relationship with China, which for the past few years we have been dazzled by their economic power, but blind to what they're doing to their own people. And I'm now thinking particularly in the case of Hong Kong, where the young activists there are begging the British government to come and speak on their behalf. And I feel we have a certain moral duty to the people of Hong Kong. And it reminds me a little bit of what happens here, we're often forgotten about, and it seems the same thing is exactly happening in Hong Kong, because economically it's not a good idea to upset the Chinese. So I do wonder how you would take us forward to a respectable relationship with a superpower like that, and particularly those people in Hong Kong. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Felicity, for our, yes, let's give. Thank you, Felicity, for asking that question. And I was asked this last night on Sky News, actually, and I said that I'm someone who's never had to fight for my freedom. My dad was in the Navy, and thanks to the service of his generation, we won the Cold War. So they knew what it was like to put their lives on the line for the values that we believe in. China is a very, very important country. We can't stop its growth, and we shouldn't want to, because they're lifting a lot of people out of poverty, and it's a huge success story. And of course we want to benefit from trading opportunities with China, and we wish them well. But we can never compromise on our values. And the first time I met the Chinese foreign minister last August, Hong Kong was one of the issues that I raised with him. And I'm afraid since then things have got worse, and I gave a statement to the media this morning in which I said that none of us support the violence that we saw on TV last night. But we do understand the reason for people's anger and the reason for people's fears that their basic freedoms are going to be taken away. And so the way to address this issue is not by repression or any heavy-handed tactics by the Hong Kong government, but to understand the root causes of those concerns, including that extradition bill, which quite understandably people feel could mean that if they speak their mind politically, which of course is one of the great freedoms they have in Hong Kong, they could get shipped off to China and get sent to prison. So, we do want calm there, but we want the government of Hong Kong and the government of China to understand that what makes Hong Kong special are the freedoms of its people.
But what can we as a country actually do? I mean, we are the 5th largest economy in the world. You just paid tribute to China, saying it was a tremendous success story, which in economic terms it may be, but certainly not in human rights terms. But what can we do apart from, I mean, you tweeted the other day saying our support for Hong Kong is unwavering. You put it in capitals, which is significant on Twitter. But in practical terms, what can the UK government do?
Well, Hong Kong is part of China. And, we have to accept that. But the freedoms in Hong Kong are enshrined in a joint declaration signed by Margaret Thatcher and Deng Xiaoping in 1984, and that is an internationally binding legal agreement between our two countries. And what I said then, and what I said again this morning, is that we expect that legally binding agreement to be honoured, and if it isn't, there will be serious consequences.
Which would be?
Well, I think, you have to allow me some latitude as Foreign Secretary to make a decision on that when the appropriate time comes. But I want to be absolutely clear to answer Felicity's question that our values are not negotiable and that we expect all countries to honour their legal agreements with the United Kingdom.
Right, gentleman there, followed by gentleman at the back there.
Good morning, Erwin Armstrong. Two questions. One is very simple. Will the Northern Ireland Secretary of State remain a full member of your cabinet? And the second question is, you have laid very heavy emphasis on how good you are in negotiations and what you can do. Can you negotiate a deal that will allow Northern Ireland to trade with the EU and the UK and to take part in any future UK trade deals at the same time?
The answer to both of those is yes, but to the second one, whilst we are going to need to negotiate the deal that you're talking about, I don't want to pretend this is going to be easy. It is going to be very challenging, but nor is it impossible. And I think if we take the right approach to this, the right deal is there for us. And why do I say that? Because when I talk to other European leaders, they want to solve this problem as well. They say that this is a problem for Europe as well as a problem for the UK. They don't want a no-deal Brexit. And so I think if we take the right approach, if we send them a Prime Minister that they're willing to talk to, they will give us a hearing. And I think there's a chance of a deal. I think there's a deal to be done. But I don't want to pretend that it's not going to be bumpy getting there.
Right, gentleman there. It's coming that way.
Hi, Jeremy. There's just one question I'd like to ask. Nigel Farage has shown himself to be a highly competent operator. We need all the assistance we can get. Is there any chance of his expertise being tapped into?
Well, the question was asked in a very seductive way. But I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you and say no. And the reason I'm going to say no is, apart from all the many issues that people might have about some of the characters that surround Nigel Farage, he wants a different outcome. He wants a WTO Brexit. He wants a no-deal Brexit. And I think for Northern Ireland it would be infinitely better to get a deal, and that's what I'm going to negotiate.
Who are these shady characters surrounding Nigel Farage?
Well, we don't need to go into that now. Well, Anne Widdecombe is a great Conservative politician. She should be with us.
Right. Okay, so here.
Thank you.
What, just a second.
Thank you. James O'Fee, North Down. Jeremy, I was very pleased that you, as Foreign Secretary, initiated a review of the persecution of Christians throughout the world. And also, I saw on Sunday that Prince Charles has identified himself very much as this cause. What more can we do to help these suffering brothers and sisters, particularly in the Middle East at the moment, where they are being eliminated in many areas of the lands where they grew up?
James, thank you for asking that question. I think we've had a bit of a blind spot in British foreign policy. We champion freedom of religion all over the world. I think of the Rohingya Muslims in Burma, for example, who suffered the most terrible persecution. But whether it's because of political correctness or a sense of awkwardness about our colonial past and the missionaries, I don't know. But the fact is that 80% of the people around the world who are persecuted for their faith are Christians. And they aren't wealthy Westerners. They're often very poor people. And you mentioned the Middle East. The population in the Middle East used to be 20% Christian. Now it's just 5%. And when you look at some of the terrible murders that happen in countries like Afghanistan, Libya, Egypt, what I notice is that often these things are happening in countries that we give a lot of aid money to. And so the question I want to ask is, are we using the influence we have to try to protect people who just want to worship their own God, our God, my God, in freedom? And that's what we should be championing. So I've asked the Bishop of Truro to do a review as to what more we could do in the Foreign Office, and I'm hoping that we'll publish that review next week.
Well, that question brings an end to our time with Jeremy Hunt, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. I very rudely didn't actually introduce myself at the beginning. For those of you who don't know me and Dale, I present the LBC evening show each evening. I know many of you are listeners, as you've been telling me in the run-up to this event. Now, we are now going to watch Boris Johnson's campaign video before we meet him.
Nice to see you. Hello, good morning.
Hello.
Yes, of course you can. If I get in, we'll come out deal or no deal on October the 31st.
Good man.
We'll do that.
Thank you very much.
Would that make you come back and vote Conservative again?
Yes.
That's the spirit.
Yes.
But we've got to have the courage to tell the people of this country that we can do it if we really want to. And that's the only way, actually.
And you're the only person that can do that.
A lot of teachers are telling me that they feel that the funding per pupil isn't high enough. We need more police out there, but sometimes I think we need... And stop and search?
Yes.
Totally with you.
I'm scared. My daughter used to live in the road. University.
Safe big city it was when I used to run it. I can tell you we got crime down by 20%, we got the murder rate down. But I also think we need to be supporting the the wealth creators in the business sector, because otherwise you're not going to have the dosh to invest. Right. Cut some taxes and you'll get more money in. Would you normally think of yourself as a Conservative voter, would you say?
No.
No? Ever? Can I ask you a terrible question? Would you consider voting for me?
Yes.
If there is one lesson from that referendum of 2016, it is that too many people feel left behind, that they're not able to take part fully in the opportunities and success of our country. That's why now is the time to unite our society and unite our country, to build the infrastructure, to invest in education, to improve our environment and to support our fantastic NHS, to lift everyone in our country, and of course also to make sure that we support our wealth creators and the businesses that make that investment possible. Now is the time for us to believe in ourselves and what we can do. And that's why I am standing to be leader of the Conservative Party.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Boris Johnson.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming. It's fantastic to see so many here. Last time I was speaking to the Conservatives in Northern Ireland was in Bangor many years ago. Any veterans of that occasion here? I don't know where there are, but I can tell you it was a time when our party was pretty much down in the dumps, and everybody said that we were facing a resurgent and very dangerous Labour Party. And of course, they were right then. But I'm afraid that there are huge differences between then and now. And yes, it's true that our party is facing difficulties, but we can turn it round. And we can turn it round and we can come back to win. We can turn it around by doing three very simple things. Number one, we've got to get Brexit done, and we've got to get it over the line. And we've got to get it done by October the 31st and come out of the EU. And that, believe me, will be a major relief to politics across the whole of the United Kingdom. And there are several things that we need to do. We need to make sure we look after our friends, the European Union citizens who are here. We need to make sure that we don't give that £39 billion away too cheaply, and that we suspend it in a state of creative ambiguity above the talks until such time as we get an agreement. And of course, we need to sort out the problems of the Northern Irish border, where those problems should be sorted out in the context of the free trade deal that we're going to do after we have left on October the 31st. And I think it's absolutely vital here in Northern Ireland to stress two things. And number one, that we will under no circumstances have a hard border. There will be no physical checks or infrastructure at the border in Northern Ireland. And number two, we will make sure we have an exit from the EU, a Brexit that allows the whole UK to come out entire and undivided. And we keep our union absolutely intact. And we can do it. We absolutely can do it. And I'm determined to do it, as I say, by October the 31st. And one of the pledges I have made is that if I'm lucky enough to be successful in this contest, I will be not only Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury and Minister for the Civil Service, but I will also be Minister for the Union, in which I passionately believe. Because everywhere I go around the world, I meet people who don't identify our amazing country as England or Ireland, Northern Ireland or Scotland or Wales. They think that we are the United Kingdom, and they see our brand, the UK, as being far, far more powerful as the sum of our, far more powerful than the sum of our parts. And I think they're right, and we should fight for that union, and we should defend it and protect it. And I think the second thing that we need to do, obviously, is to get our mojo back as Conservatives and to believe in our cause, to believe in wealth creation, and to stand up for the moral force of our political ideas, because they're the right ideas. And I think if we support the wealth creators and the entrepreneurs and the business community, then we'll have the tax that we need to pay for fantastic public services and a great education and infrastructure and all the rest of it. And I think people understand that, and they can understand the fundamental balance and symmetry at the heart of our conservative agenda. And I think if we get our mojo back and we believe in ourselves again as a conservative party, then of course I think that we will be able to take the fight to the enemy and to our opponents. And there are two parties at the moment that are prospering mightily from in the whole of the UK from our failure to get Brexit over the line. They're of course the Brexit Party and the Liberal Democrats. And once we've done that, we'll prick those two puffballs, as it were, and lots of voters who are currently with them will come back to our party, and that will put us in a much better position to do what I think we really all want to do, and that is to get ready to defeat Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party. And it's utterly vital that we do that, because you all understand, I think the economic disaster that Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party would present for our country. I mean, the guy is, he backs Hamas and Hezbollah, and he seemed to side with the mullahs of Tehran the other day rather than with our allies in the United States when it came to the dispute over what was happening in the Persian Gulf. Quite incredible. When the Skripal poisonings took place in Salisbury, he seemed to be wanting to give Moscow the benefit of the doubt. I don't know if you remember that. And it's even worse than that. This is a guy who would, as I think everybody in this room understands, who would favour a united Ireland and who would break up our union, and worse than that, who has in the past been quite shameless in his support of the agenda of the IRA, and who has, and John McDonnell has actually condoned the armed struggle, as he calls it, of the IRA and the bombs and bullets of the terrorists. And I think for that reason alone, he should be kept away from number 10, to say nothing of the economic disaster he would cause. And this is a guy who would put up taxes on just about everything from income to pensions to corporation tax, financial transaction tax, inheritance tax, even a garden tax he would impose on this country, to pay for a deranged plan of renationalisation costing £300 billion. He would be a political, moral catastrophe. He would be an economic catastrophe for our country. He would break up our precious union, and we cannot let him anywhere near number 10. And in fending him off, as I believe that we can, if we get Brexit done, if we re-energise our party, as I'm sure that we can, I believe I'm the best guy to be unleashed on that project, because I would just remind you that the last time I faced an emanation of the London Labour left, I came from behind to defeat him, a considerably wilier and more devious customer, by the way, than Jeremy Corbyn. I defeated him when our party was 17 points behind Labour in the polls in London. We did it then, we can do it again, and with your help and support, we will. Thank you all very much for your kind attention this morning.
On the way here, I asked my taxi driver what he would want to ask the both of you. And he said, how can it be justified paying members of the Northern Ireland Assembly a salary when they haven't really been doing anything for the last couple of years? How can you get the Assembly and Executive back up and running again?
Well, I think they need to get back round the table as fast as possible. They need to be sorting this thing out. And I would urge all sides to make the compromises that are necessary to restore the government of Northern Ireland at Stormont. And there's a very good reason for that. I speak as a former leader of a city government in London, and you need when you have local business, when you have local communities that require proper representation, you need somebody to stick up for their economic interests and to champion them and to move that society forward. And it can't. The current drift is not right for Northern Ireland. And I would urge all sides, get on with it, restore Stormont and get it over the line.
What do you put that drift down to?
Well, I think that there are various difficulties that there are some sensitive issues on either side, and we all know roughly what they are, and we all know that they need to be addressed with common sense and with tact and with sensitivity, but there is scope for compromise to get it done.
But it's taken 2 years. What can you bring to it to really galvanise it?
Well, I think that they have I will do whatever I can personally to energise and direct the talks and to try to bring people together. But I think that what everybody needs to do is to recognise that it's the citizens and the voters of Northern Ireland who are losing out as a result of this failure to get together, and I hope they'll get on with it.
Moving on to Brexit, do you recognise that the backstop in its current form doesn't have the support and consent of most unionists and therefore breaches one of the fundamental tenets of the Good Friday Agreement? What will you do about that?
Well, I think that as I've said many times, the backstop presents a Prime Minister of the UK with an absolutely unacceptable choice between abandoning our ability to govern ourselves in the sense that the UK would have to submit to EU law on tariffs and EU law on regulations with no say on those rules, or alternatively to give up control of the government of Northern Ireland. And that is clearly unacceptable. And that's a choice that I totally reject. As I've said before, the union comes first, of course, but I believe that we should not be faced with that choice. And the solution must be for the whole UK to come out in its entirety from the EU and to find the solutions that are needed for frictionless trade across the border in the context of the free trade deal. And we can. And Michel Barnier and others have said that those solutions are there. And indeed, they have said that they wouldn't impose a hard border themselves. And they're quite right. I think it'd be lunacy to do so.
It is in the withdrawal agreement. They say they're not going to reopen the withdrawal agreement or make any changes to the backstop. How can you persuade them to do that?
Well, I think that the withdrawal agreement as it currently stands is a dead letter. And, as I said, there are useful bits in it. The provisions on citizens can be taken out, they can be disaggregated, and they can be used. We should be passing those through the House of Commons anyway, in a supererogatory way. But the money, as I say, is quite a lot. But the question of the backstop, and don't forget, the reason why we have it is that it was basically devised with the support, if not the instigation, of the British side, partly because there are many who conceive that the relationship that they wanted with the EU was one where we stayed in the customs union and in full regulatory alignment, even though that made a nonsense of Brexit. And so what the backstop really represents is, I'm afraid, the incoherence at the heart of the strategy that we've been pursuing over the last few years. We've been wanting to come out of the EU, supposedly, whilst actually being prepared to stay in the customs union and in full regulatory alignment, when that is tantamount to coming out of the EU but being run by the EU. And so what I think people in this country want is to come out as a whole UK, solve the issues of the backstop in the context of the FTA, and use the opportunities that Brexit brings us to do things differently, where that is necessary and where that is exciting for business and industry. Well, that's what we should be doing.
What would you say about the idea that maybe a temporary solution would be to have a snap referendum in Northern Ireland on a temporary membership of a customs union in order to get the EU...
referendum?
I think to get the EU
anything
to
that would snap with, I think, people's patience. I just think, you know, I really can't. We had a referendum. Issues were very extensively debated. Let's get on and deliver on the mandate of the people. Because if we don't, believe me, my fellow Conservatives, and it's great to see so many here, we will continue to hemorrhage support in our country. And the Conservative Party will not recover as a fighting force until we get Brexit done and over the line, and until we get it done properly. Believe me.
Do you think that abortion and same-sex marriage should be legalised in Northern Ireland? And if the Assembly doesn't vote it through, should the UK Parliament do so?
Look, I think that this is preeminently a matter for the people of Northern Ireland, and that is why, and at the risk of sounding like a crack record, I want and hope that the government of Northern Ireland can be resumed as soon as possible so that this issue can be decided in the forum where it properly belongs. In other words, at Stormont. I mean, you know, this is for the people of Northern Ireland and for their politicians.
What do you say to Sarah Canning, Lyra McKee's partner, who said the greatest tribute that could be paid to her would be for the UK Parliament to actually enact same-sex marriage in Northern Ireland?
Well, I understand her feelings, and I voted years ago for equal marriage and support it completely. But I think that the forum in which this issue should be debated and decided is the government of Northern Ireland, and that's another reason to get it going. Get it going for economic reasons, but also to sort out these difficult political questions. And I don't think that the UK government should be imposing something that should be decided here by the people of Northern Ireland.
Do you think it's about time the Conservative Party organised properly in Northern Ireland?
Well, I think this looks pretty proper to me. I mean, you know, well, look at. I think I think it's vaguely disrespectful of Ian to suggest that this turnout today is no.
To boo me again.
No, not at all. No, I didn't encourage you.
No, you didn't. You know.
No,
let me take that back.
No, no, don't boo him under any circumstances. He's a great man. No,
you know what I mean, in the fact that in Conservative campaign headquarters in London, they give lots of money all around the country to different constituencies, different regions to promote the Conservative message. I think there is a feeling in Northern Ireland that the Conservative Party here is treated as a bit of a backwater.
Well, I think I may be the only candidate left in this race who's actually been to speak to the Conservative Party in Northern Ireland before. I don't know whether you interviewed my. I don't know whether he raised it, but I mean,
You have also talked to the DUP, haven't you?
I have. Okay, I put my hands up to that one. But I've been to talk to Conservatives in Northern Ireland. I've done what I can to help and to encourage. And I do think it's wonderful that Conservatives are organising here in Northern Ireland. But the fact is that we have an arrangement of confidence and supply with the DUP, and it's perfectly right that I think Philip Hammond and myself and a number of others did go to their conference. And shall I tell you why I think that was a reasonable thing to do? Because if we didn't have the DUP supporting us in Westminster, much as I admire the work of Conservatives in Northern Ireland, if we didn't have the DUP, and I'm afraid the truth is we would have Jeremy Corbyn, who has an agenda to break up the union, to say nothing of his support for the IRA and all the rest of it. So I justify my visit on those grounds, and I was made it absolutely clear that I was speaking as a visitor and not any sense of participant at their conference.
Shall we move on to the next question? Final question.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Do you watch Game of Thrones?
I have watched bits of it. I haven't got into it but of course I know that Game of Thrones is filmed here in Northern Ireland, and not only that, but of course Game of Thrones is I think the next Star Wars movie. I think the George Lucas is going to do a film about Obi-Wan Kenobi, as far as I know, which is going to be made here in Northern Ireland. But many, many wonderful things are made or come from Northern Ireland.
Is there a character in Game of Thrones, or even Star Wars, that you can identify with?
The trouble is, I don't know Game of Thrones well enough to be able to identify with any of the characters. Star Wars. I tell you what, I identify very much with the guy with the lightsaber. The Jedi Knights, that's it. I tell you why. Because I'm delighted to say one of the many links between Northern Ireland and myself. I'm proud to say that the lightsaber is manufactured, was invented. Guess where? In Uxbridge in South Ruislip, I'm proud to say, which is the constituency I represent. And I have a lightsaber in my office in Westminster. It's a most beautiful thing, which was presented to me by no less the figure than Christopher Lee. Anyway, that's a digression, but it shows how our United Kingdom is linked together. We invented the lightsaber in Uxbridge. It is wielded in Northern Ireland, and the resulting film is sold around the world and grosses more than any other movie in history or something like that. Which shows, by the way, how the UK is dominant in the creative culture and media sectors as well as so many others.
Right, time for questions. Who would like to ask the first one? Gentleman at the back there, then gentleman there.
Johnny Andrew, Strangford Association. In view of the Northern Ireland office not being ready for Brexit, how do you propose to ensure that they're ready? And can I also ask how you propose to create a more positive Brexit in Northern Ireland, as we've been faced with really almost a pro-soft Brexit here? In terms of the fixed link, how do you rank the fixed link in terms of your infrastructure projects?
Thank you. I think we should be very positive about Brexit, and we should not be terrified of a no-deal Brexit. We should not be terrified of coming out on WTO terms. We will make sure we look after the agriculture interest. We have deficiency payments, farm gate payments, export refunds, whatever is necessary to protect farmers. We'll make sure that just-in-time supply chains are protected. And I think a lot of the negativity about a WTO Brexit has been wildly overdone. People say that there won't be any clean drinking water and the planes won't fly, and then there won't be milk solids and glucose and whey to make Mars bars. It's all, do you really believe that? It is total nonsense. I prophesy very confidently that we will have a successful Brexit. The planes will fly, there will be clean drinking water, and there will be way for the Mars bars, because where there's a will, there's a way, as I never tire of saying. And as for the fixed link, I presume by that you mean the proposal by Alan Dunlop of Liverpool University for a fixed link between Northern Ireland and Scotland. Is that what you're talking about? Well, I'm an enthusiast for that idea. I'm going to put it out there. I'm an enthusiast for that idea. I think it's a good idea. But again, that is the kind of project that should be pursued by a dynamic Northern Ireland government, championed by local people, with local consent and interest, backed by local business, and mobilised by the politicians of Northern Ireland. That's what should happen. We want I'm all in favour of it, but it's got to be supported by people here in Northern Ireland.
It would need national finance, surely.
Yes. But
so you would guarantee
believe me,
that?
Can I just say, with infrastructure projects, finance is not the issue, or not. The issue is political will. The issue is getting the business community to see that this could be something that works for them. The issue is getting popular demand and popular consent for a great infrastructure project. And that is why you need Stormont.
Okay. Gentleman there, and then there.
Hello, Mr. Johnson. My name's Adam Flanagan. I've recently completed my A-levels in South Belfast. It's good to hear about you defending the union, but rather than taking a defensive approach, can you tell me specifically how you would promote and prosper promote and foster Northern Ireland's place in the Union, especially when there's increasing apathy in the mainland towards our place in the Union?
Well, not anywhere near me. There isn't, and believe me, I mean very sincerely what I said. When I go around the world, I see our country, the UK, loved, respected, admired, because they know that we stand for certain things. But it's not Northern Ireland or England or Scotland or Wales that stands. It's the whole UK. It's that Union flag, red, white, and blue, that is the great global brand. And, by the way, the biggest soft power brand across the world, with the possible exception of the United States, and I exempt them because they're, after all, a spiritual, cultural, and intellectual child of the UK. And no, be careful what I say. America, the United States of America, is spiritually, culturally, intellectually descended. I think it would be a fairer way to put it from our country. But people believe in us. They believe in the UK and in our armed services, in our diplomacy, in our reputation for science, for innovation, a lot of which goes on here. And I want, as I said, I want to champion the Union, to answer your question directly, by being not only Prime Minister, First Lord of the Treasury, Minister for the Civil Service, but also Minister for the Union. I would like to have there will be a special unit in number 10 to make sure that every policy is sense and stress tested for the benefits that it will bring to the Union. And I want to make it absolutely clear that under no circumstances, whatever happens, will I allow the EU or anyone else to create any kind of division down the Irish Sea or to attenuate our union. And that is why I so bitterly opposed the withdrawal agreement, you may recall. And that's why the best way forward for our country, and that's why I resigned over Chequers, you may recall, because it's a terrible moral blackmail it puts on the UK government. You can't have that. You can't have that approach. The way to protect the union is to come out of the EU whole and entire in the way that I'm recommending, solve the border issues where they belong logically in the context of the FTA that we're going to do. And I think once they recognise in Brussels that they have a different leader in the UK and a totally different approach to the negotiations, I think actually they're going to be rather relieved, because for the last 3 years they've faced a lot of indecision, a lot of confusion about what the UK really wants, and now's the time to get it right.
You were in the cabinet for the first 2 years of that indecision. You held one of the senior offices of state, and yet you're almost saying, well, nothing to do with me, Gov.
Well, if you remember, I spent a lot of the time trying to wrench the steering wheel back in the direction of common sense. And we had a speech at Lancaster House in the beginning of 2017 by the PM, which almost got us back on the right track. And then it was a very, very tough fight up to Chequers in the middle of 2018, when it became obvious, finally, that we were going in completely the wrong direction. And I resigned on principle and made my argument, and I think we're going to win. And we will do an exit from the EU, which keeps our union, but allows the whole UK to take advantage of Brexit.
Just one quick follow-up on what the gentleman said there. The papers, or the Telegraph reported this morning that you want to restructure government to abolish Secretary of State for Northern Ireland.
Actually, it didn't say that. What the Telegraph said, that I was being urged to do that. No one took the trouble to urge me in person before telling the Telegraph that they were urging me to do it. So whatever urgings were taking place, they were not directed personally at me. There
will be a Secretary of State for Northern Ireland.
There certainly will. I hesitate to dissent from anything that the Telegraph ever says, but I wasn't aware of being urged in any such direction.
Right. There was a gentleman there, and then we'll have the lady down the front.
Hi, Boris. Philip Black. I'm just wondering, if you aren't out of the EU on the 31st of October, what are your plans? are you going to have a general election, or are you going to stand down, or, you know, what is the backup plan?
But what is this defeatism? You know, this is what they keep hearing in Brussels, and they keep thinking these guys aren't serious. You know, the law at the moment says that the UK must come out of the EU on October the 31st, unless the Prime Minister of the UK, unless the government of the UK asks for another extension. Why would we want an extension? And does it look hands up? Who wants an extension? Right, okay. There's a couple of people there at the back. Well, okay, all right, okay, fair enough. A couple of people want an extension. I think the overwhelming majority of our party wants to get out on October the 31st, and that is what we're going to do. And we're going to get out in the way that I've described. I think it's the most sensible approach. It will enable us to get on, do a great free trade deal, and take advantage of Brexit. And at the moment, you know, I think any more can kicking simply plays into the hands of our opponents. And although it is true that Jeremy Corbyn is a very, very feeble leader, and there's a big difference between now and when I first came to speak to Northern Irish Conservatives, I think we were then facing Tony Blair, who was coming up, glistering-toothed, plausible, crowding all over the centre ground. But that's not the case with Corbyn. Corbyn is far left and deeply implausible in his economic policies, and in the recent council elections in May, he managed to go backwards. He's so incompetent. He lost seats. That didn't happen with Blair.
But you can't guarantee that Parliament won't be successful in amending the law to stop you from leaving on October the 31st, can you?
Well, of course, what I believe is that parliamentarians will want to take their responsibilities very seriously and will understand, as I say, that we are staring down the barrel. And our country faces a choice now. Our politicians face a choice. They can continue to hemorrhage trust. They can continue to be seen as willing to undermine democracy. We can lose more votes to the Brexit Party and to the Liberal Democrats, or we can take our responsibilities seriously and in a mature way and get it over the line. And I think that's what MPs are going to do. And look at the vote that happened a couple of weeks ago about whether to rule out no deal. Actually, they didn't. I think people are increasingly waking up to the fact that this is existential for the Tory party, and it's probably also existential for Labour as well. If they, you know, they will also lose huge amounts of support unless they get this done.
So I've got Dominic Grieve for an hour on my radio show tonight. What should I ask him?
Well, I think you should ask him whether he would. What would he really prefer? What would he really prefer? Would he prefer to come out of the EU in the way that the British people were promised on October the 31st? Would he prefer to be able to get on and do all sorts of fantastic conservative things, wonderful one nation, progressive, modern conservative policies, investing in infrastructure, investing in education, in healthcare, and all the things that we care about, as well as championing the private sector? Or would he rather unnecessarily frustrate Brexit, cause deepening anger and disillusionment amongst the voters, and pave the way eventually for a Corbyn government? What does he want? The chance to build a new partnership with our European friends based on free trade and all the things we're going to do together, or a Corbyn government? That's the choice.
Lady down there, followed by gentleman there.
Lynn Anderson, East Belfast. Following on from that, I was going to ask a question about party unity. And if you became Prime Minister, what would you actually do about some of your Conservative MP colleagues who seem to have been putting personal preference above the democratic result of the referendum, and actually doing all they can, it seems to me, to undermine and sabotage trying to get Brexit through?
I would love them up. I would, thank you. I don't think you were applauding my answer. You were applauding the question. I would give them as much understanding and love as I possibly could and try to bring everybody together, because I really think this is existential, folks. We either do this or we're doomed. And we've got to get this thing done, and that applies to Dominic, and it applies to, you know, I was out campaigning this morning yesterday morning with Bob Neal, who some of you may know. It takes a very different view from me, but he understands the need to get this thing over the line. So I think we need a mood of determination and unity. And I would just remind you that before you today as the candidate with more than half the parliamentary party already behind me, and many more now signing up. So I'm very pleased by that outcome, and I have dozens of Remainers, dozens of Leavers already flocking to our standards. So I'm very confident and very excited.
Okay, gentleman there, and then we'll go over there.
Thanks very much for taking the question. So Queen's University Conservative Society, Rowan Wise, I'm the chair. I want to ask Boris, he talks a lot about the moderate progressive policies of the current Conservative government, on which I wholly agree. How does he think that fits with him going and talking to the DUP? Does that not send the right signals when the DUP want Northern Ireland to be treated differently in terms of social policy to the rest of the UK?
Well, look, there's a reason I'm a conservative, and that's because I believe in our policies. We should be very proud of our record in delivering on equalities, and I believe that we've done some great things for society in the whole of the UK, and we should stick at that. And I've said what I've said about the DUP, which is that actually I think that they have been indispensable by delivering that agreement on confidence and supply in preventing our country being governed by Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, and you know that's the choice we face.
Do you get frustrated that you are painted by your opponents, I don't mean Jeremy Hunt, but in the media on the left of politics, as some sort of right-wing populist? Whereas actually, if you look at your record on particularly social issues, you're about as liberal as you can get.
Well, I know that people think I know. I don't know where it all comes from. It's complete hysteria, but there you go. You know, people will say all sorts of extraordinary things, and you just have to keep trying to correct them. I was, you know, there's. I tell you what, it's all. I remember before I became mayor in 2008, there were a whole bunch of lefties who promised faithfully to leave the city or the country if I was elected. And The Guardian ran a whole supplement about how awful I was, and the most bigoted, xenophobic person that had ever stood for high office anywhere in the UK. And at the end of 8 years, most of them were working for me, actually, was certainly supporting me. And I think I had 60% support more at the end than when I came in. But I remain a proud, free market, low tax conservative. I just happen to think that our country does better when we send out a signal to the world that we're inclusive and tolerant and generous in our approach to other people, and that is one of the reasons why the UK economy is so massively successful.
Right, gentleman there.
Thanks very much. Having moved here from Scotland,
Malcolm, I know, I was delighted to see
Malcolm
you there.
Scott.
Yes.
We did a great trip up to the Highlands.
I remember.
Quite a few years ago. With hearing your comments about the bridge, which was very positive, because
I'd love it. But
massively pro the bridge.
Do a lot of infrastructure around Stranraer and all that.
Yeah, and what needs to be done, which is political will and local will. How would you view the same political will and local will if there was a promotion of a financial tax-free zone in Belfast?
Well, that's the sort of thing we can do, but only once we leave the EU. Malcolm, thank you very much for your question. We could do free ports. It would be a massive boost to this economy, but only once we come out. And I want to have about 6 of them, by the way. We should definitely be doing free ports. and tax-free zones. They have delivered around the world. Well, I think there are about 130 countries that have them. We don't because of our membership of the EU, and there are plainly areas that would benefit from them.
So why 6, and where would they be?
I'm not going to tell you where they're going.
I tried.
They're going to be all over the place.
I tried.
Particularly in Northern Ireland.
Right, lady there. Wait for the microphone.
Good afternoon, Leslie McGarrity, North Down. I wanted to ask you, Boris, about the national crisis that is facing us all, which is social care. And I'm a provider of social care in Northern Ireland, and I have seen over the last number of years the cuts and the difficulties there are in both staffing, recruiting and sustaining social care. And we saw how Theresa May fell on the sword of that on the dementia tax, and how Labour was so easily able to beat her with it at the last election. What would your proposals be to sustain and establish social care in the United Kingdom?
You are so right. I mean, it's fascinating. Doing election campaigns like this is so valuable because you really start to understand what's top of people's minds. This is number one. And we've got to sort it out because it affects every family in the land. It affects my family, it affects everybody's family. People are thinking, how on earth am I going to pay for the cost of care over what could be a huge period of time running into tens, hundreds of thousands of pounds? Where's that money coming from? And all I can say is we need to approach, and of course we put another 3.9 billion I think into social care as a government, but we got to recognise in the long term we need to sort it out, and there are no quick fixes or easy answers. We need to bring everybody together to try to take the politics out of it, because as you rightly pointed out, it became very difficult at the last election. The two principles should be that nobody should face eviction from their home to pay for the cost of their social care. And everybody should be entitled to stay in their home. And number two, everybody should be entitled to dignity and security in their old age. But we need to bring the parties together to sort this out across our country.
Ladies and gentlemen, Boris Johnson.
Is that it?
That's it.
Thank you very much for coming.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that's aided you in your decision-making process. If you haven't had enough politics today, do listen to me, 7 p.m, LBC, with Dominic Grieve tonight. Thank you.